This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin, bringing you stories of capitalism. From the Himalayas, where inequality amplified by social media led to the fall of a government, to the story not just of capitalism, but about capitalism, looking for a new way forward in the wake of the great financial crisis, with no new model in sight after 7 years of looking for it. And small businesses, many of them family-owned, help drive the American economy. As boomers retire, their children may not want to pick up where their parents left off. But we start with China and the United States, with President Xi and President Trump trying to find ways to work together despite some important strategic differences. Stephen Rattner of Willett Advisors manages the personal and philanthropic assets of our founder and majority shareholder, Michael Bloomberg. Steve recently returned from the Middle Kingdom, where he surveyed the state of the economy and investment opportunities.
It was interesting, David, because I saw more than I've seen it before, a kind of two-speed or two-factor economy. On the one hand, everything you read about the domestic economy is largely true. Consumption is weak. Consumers are dispirited. They're still trying to sort out the property bubble. Xi does not seem to have any real appetite to do stimulus or any of the things we would probably do here under the same circumstances. It's not a disaster. It's growing. And so let's just put that in perspective. But on the other hand, their cutting-edge industries, their export industries are really extraordinary. I toured car factories. I saw robots. I drove in autonomous EVs, talked to a lot of people, obviously. And we should not be under any illusion about their competitiveness, even in things like AI, which we can talk more about, relative to where we are at the moment.
Is that sustainable, do you think? Because there was a time, there was a dual circulation theory from President Xi, that you had the domestic supporting the international and vice versa. If they don't really get the domestic consumption going, the domestic economy going, and they have, as you say, the property challenges, there's a problem with investment there, can they continue to support that level of innovation?
Well, that's why I want to put this in perspective, because the domestic economy is slow. Prices are not rising. They're not really much falling anymore. But it's still growing by some amount. And they, of course, have far more fiscal space than we have because, and there are a lot of different numbers around, but my conclusion, my view is that they are not nearly as leveraged from a governmental point of view as we are. And so they have fiscal space. She is just reluctant to use it. But if you read his latest 5-year plan, for example, which came out a couple months ago, he is very focused on these cutting-edge technology industries and of having China have a premier place in the world. And they are on their way to doing that, if not already there in a lot of cases.
What did you find in those cutting-edge technologies? I mean, we hear about biotech, we hear about EVs, certainly, and AI, as you mentioned.
So we can take them in whatever order you want. On biotech, they have gone from importing our drugs to their country to exporting their drugs to our country. Not the actual drugs, but the drug development. And if you talk to any biotech investor, and we have a number of them, they will tell you that they are now spending time in China. What has become a thing is licensing Chinese drugs into the U.S. You have to do the trials again and so forth to comply with U.S. regulations. But they can develop drugs faster, better, cheaper than we can for all the reasons you can imagine that China does things well when they put their mind to it. And so that's become a big thing. AI, we were obviously ahead, and we're still probably ahead, certainly in terms of adoption and the value of the companies and things like that. But they have a number of very good models and building more. I think the question about AI for them is whether the world will use Chinese models. I think it'll be tough here. I'm not so sure it'll be that tough in the rest of the world because they will be so much cheaper. For example, Huawei, as you may remember, was deep into the telecoms infrastructure in many parts of the world until we effectively shut it down. And so people were willing to use Chinese technology, and they may well in this case as well. And in the case of EVs and cars, they have something like 50 car companies, too many, and there's consolidation going on and so on. But the quality of the cars is unbelievable, and the price is unbelievable.
It seems like Washington is fixated on China. Is China as fixated on Washington? Do they pay as much attention to us as we do to them?
It may well be on geopolitical and strategic things, which are not my area of expertise, as you well know. But on the economy, no, I don't think. I think they feel like they know how to do this, and they're they're on their own. For example, the last trade spat that Trump and Xi settled we lost, basically. They can buy soybeans from Brazil. They can get soybeans in other places. We can't get these rare earth minerals, which, by the way, aren't that rare, as you know. What's rare is the processing ability that China has developed, in which we essentially keep limited here because of environmental concerns, which I certainly subscribe to. But the result was Trump essentially had to back down. I mean, there's too much stuff that they make that we need at this point to survive. And so I think they're in a pretty strong position vis-a-vis us. As
China looks externally, what do they see as their opportunity markets? I mean, you mentioned Brazil, the soybeans, buying soybeans from Brazil. Soybeans. But what about for export? Who do they think are their opportunities out there?
Well, I think mostly the developed world, obviously. Their EVs are huge in Europe. The Europeans are trying to clamp down on it. But if you look at new car registrations in Europe, BYD is, I think, probably, I would guess, registering as many cars there as everybody else all put together because of the price. And it raises an interesting question for us, which is that, I believe in the auto industry here, as you know, but we're effectively denying our consumers the chance to buy a cheaper, better car because we effectively have banned Chinese cars by using 100% tariffs. And so we sell 16 million cars a year here, average price $50,000 a car. If you cut $10,000 off the price of that car, that's $160 billion a year of benefit to consumers here if we let them in at the cost of our automobile industry. So these are really tough issues for us and for other developed countries.
What have you seen in the nature of the strategy for the U.S. as against China? Because right now it appears that what President Trump and his administration are saying is, let's slow China down through trade actions, through export controls, things like that. Is that a viable strategy to slow China down?
But my view is the only way we're going to beat China is by doing a better job ourselves. We're not going to out-negotiate them. We're not going to out-war them, if you will. We have to just do better ourselves. There's no other solution to this, in my opinion.
Your day job is investing and picking investors, and that's why you went to China, after all. What did you learn for investors who are looking at China? What opportunities do you think there are there, if any?
Well, first of all, for the average investor, I would say you shouldn't be messing around with these. These are sharp objects, and China is a sharp object. There's no question about that. But investing, as you well know, is a mix of valuation and upside. And China valuations, even though the stock market has had a heck of a run this year, are still relatively cheap, certainly compared to the S&P. The multiple's probably half of the S&Ps or something like that. And companies, there are some doing well, some doing less well, depending upon what part of the economy they're levered to and things like that. But the companies are still doing reasonably well. For example, in AI, in terms of the valuation point, the Chinese LLMs, comparables to OpenAI, they're valued at $4 or $5, $10 billion, not $500 billion. And so, it's a lot harder to get hurt jumping out of a basement window.
Can you see a path, whether we're on it now or not, forward to a reasonable economic relationship between China and the United States? When we went through a long period of time, we had no relations with them. Then we sort of really became enamored, particularly with Deng Xiaoping, and coming to the WTO, you'll get more like us. Now there's a growing disenchantment with it. We have to get along with the second largest economy in the world, presumably.
Well, they never got more like us. I'm very admiring of the Chinese. I'm very respectful of them. But the idea that they play fair in trade was always an illusion. And the people who thought putting them in the WTO would bring them into the community of nations and then they'd start to play fair were obviously mistaken, because they have never done it. And you can go back to the pirated video cassettes and all the other examples there are of Chinese trade practices. So we can do our best to nudge them, pull them, cajole them, whatever. And if all else fails, then we do have to have trade restrictions if they're really, truly not going to play fair. But as I said, I think the only way we're going to, quote, win against China is by doing a better job at home.
Coming up, nestled in the Himalayas, Nepal may seem far removed from the rest of the world, but it turns out that it shares problems of wealth inequality and a vigorous social media to show its citizens just what's wrong. This is a story about turmoil at the top of the world. In September, Nepalese demonstrators took to the streets, burning buildings and forcing a change in the government. Our colleague Michael McKee traveled to Kathmandu to see firsthand what led to the violence and found a story of inequality and social media not all that different from the rest of the world.
I was tired of living in a country where not my capabilities or my competence, but the connection that people have takes them forward.
We plan to have a very small, peaceful protest.
Did you stay off of social media or did you go back to posting?
No, went back to posting. I will never stop posting. It's fine even if I die, but I will be dying speaking up for my country.
There is a huge class difference, and all these people, they get these opportunities not because they are capable of it, just because they know somebody.
Madagascar, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Maldives, East Timor, Nepal.
Government properties being demolished, burned down. Did we ever think that we will be targeted next? No.
The big question is, how many other similar countries does this spread to?
Now more than ever before, people have a window into the lives of others. Social media connects youth across countries and continents, but it also shows them riches beyond their reach. And as inequality and unfairness become more conspicuous, some Gen Zers have taken to the streets. But nowhere was the movement more visible and more violent than in Nepal, a small democratic country wedged between Tibet and India.
We were marching towards the parliament gate and I was always very opinionated. I used to have opinions on everything. I was a rebel kid. This video is about me asking.
Prashamsa Subedi is a 22-year-old law student who lives with her parents in the outskirts of Nepal's capital, Kathmandu. Not long ago, her life took a surprising turn.
It was 2024 when I started uploading the videos about my political opinion, what I felt the government was doing wrong, and that's when it took off.
In late June, after a Nepali politician downplayed the country's poverty, Subedi posted an angry response on TikTok. A day later, her clip had over 1 million views.
How can a leader, mantri say that? Ke?
Before, when we think of it, these politicians would not have their life public. So we would not know what their lifestyle was, how everything was going. But then there is a very famous politician. One of his family members was a vlogger. And she used to document their lives and every clip used to go viral. And people used to see what lavish lifestyle they were having, which we could not even imagine. So that is how it all sparked, that is how it all triggered.
In Nepal, there are so many people who have hand-to-mouth situation, and then you show off your luxury, this and that, everybody would get angry. So was I.
Although inequality in Nepal may be more visible, its existence is hardly new. Its 31 million inhabitants make an average annual income of less than $2,000. And at around $40 billion per year, Nepal's GDP is lower than that of any U.S. state. But GDP has been on the rise, climbing at an average annual rate of over 4% in the last 10 years. It's also got a Gini coefficient that's fallen over the past 2 decades, showing that, with the limited data we have, the gap between rich and poor in Nepal seems to be shrinking. Ghanshyam Upadhyay is Nepal's finance secretary.
We have experienced the 4.2% economic growth in the last decade. 1 year we faced the negative growth, that is of the COVID-19 year. That's why the economy of Nepal is resilient. Inequality is reducing.
Small steps towards stability, but seemingly not enough. Anger and resentment over perceived economic injustice built up over the years, and seeing stark inequality on social media pushed people over the edge.
There's sudden visibility to how much richer the rich are than the poor, right? That ability to kind of see over the palace walls.
Clay Shirky studies the effect of social media on politics at New York University.
In revolution after revolution, there has been some sudden change in perception of how the wealthy are living. In Nepal, it was around this idea of Nepo babies, right? It was the idea that the children of the rich were not suffering the way the rest of Gen Z was. There's a case, one of the famous Nepalese influencers, she was a former Miss Nepal, she was a Harvard graduate, and she was widely followed on Instagram. And once the idea of the Nepo baby arrives, many of her followers turned against her. She suddenly became a target for outrage for exactly the same thing she'd been posting all the way along.
Something had changed about the way Nepal's youth saw their country and the lives of its wealthiest citizens. It was not just the inequality that felt wrong, but the inequality of opportunity. The idea that those at the bottom would never have the chance to rise up, and those at the top might not deserve to be there at all. And although generational wealth, corruption, and nepotism had always existed in Nepal, today they were in your face, on your phone, seemingly flaunted. As the online furor grew, the government made a dramatic decision.
And Nepal has cracked down on a number of social media platforms, including Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, X.
I was, first of all, utterly hopeless and helpless.
18-year-old Shaswat Lamachan was one of the many Gen Zers who was angry about the social media ban.
Talked with some activist friends, figured out like what we could do, and we concluded that doing a protest will be the best way to do it.
Lamachan says he expected 200 protesters to show up. But across the country, others like him were putting out the same call to friends and influencers.
Today, we are here to say enough.
First, never-ending corruption.
The collective action problem is if one person goes to the government and is protesting out front, they are completely helpless. But if 1,000 people do, they have to pay attention. And if 10,000 people do, they're overwhelmed.
Everyone we spoke with said the plan was for a small, peaceful protest. But in the 3 short days between the social media ban and the protest on September 8th, the call to action spread like wildfire.
By that point, the evening of September 7, we figured out that this would be huge because everyone was talking about it. It ended up becoming a national thing.
Well, tell us what happened on September 8th when you woke up in the morning.
I didn't sleep that day.
We all planned to wear school dresses so that police could not even beat us because it's illegal to beat school children. We started marching and we were chanting slogans and we were having fun, we were singing songs. Some people were playing Uno there, and we were 100 meters away from Parliament where we were sitting, and we got the sense of tear gas.
In an instant, everything changed.
That is when I got the news of a person being killed. We didn't think it would go that far, but there was a news of a person being targeted. I was just scrolling through the news. I could not work, I could not do anything. I was just scrolling through the one scroll, one death, one scroll, one death. After the news that one person is shot and he's dead, I felt so guilty because he might have come watching my videos. So maybe I am responsible for his death.
Police firing actual shots at children dying.
News of the violence traveled quickly, and then escalation.
The very clip that I would say that ignited the fire in the people was a 17-year-old getting shot on his head.
It outraged the whole population. The next day it was not Gen Z anymore. It was the nation versus the government.
The Hilton got burned. They started burning all the government buildings and everything.
Our palaces were burnt. Our banks were looted.
This factory belonged to the family of Nirvana Chaudhary, whose home was also set ablaze. His family owns one of Nepal's largest businesses.
So they went after your parents' house and then one of your factories.
Our showrooms got burned down and motorcycles looted, vehicles looted. People are frustrated. People are jobless. Do they want to see big homes over there? Frustration was what was targeted towards individuals and families like ours.
By the end of the violence, over 70 people had died, 2,000 injured. All the Gen Zers who spoke to us on camera made clear they never advocated violence and were far away when the situation escalated to the highest levels of government. On September 9th, one day after the protests began, many of Nepal's top leaders resigned, including the Prime Minister himself.
We never imagined this situation. It was like nobody told us we would be a country without a government.
The Gen Zers worried that in trying to improve their democracy, they might have inadvertently ended it. The army was taking control, stepping into the vacuum left by Nepal's leadership. But then, an unexpected phone call in the middle of the night.
The army invited us to sit down with them at the army headquarters to talk on what to do next, what the future of the country should look like.
Subedi also got the army's call, along with a handful of others. The ask, "You helped start this, now come fix it." Lamichan, who had started a chat room to organize the protests, helped create another, this time to pick a new leader. Over 100,000 people joined, and for hours they debated and voted. The name they chose? Sushila Karki, a retired Supreme Court justice known for fighting corruption and supporting women's rights. Subedi, the law student, got her phone number.
She was asking if we were okay and everything, and we asked her to step up, and then she said, if you guys are trusting on me, then I will have to step up, because it's not about me anymore, it's about the country.
Do you look at this and think, how amazing, I spoke into this camera and look what's happened?
Actually, no, because I still have that guilt of posting the video, and I still think some people might have come watching my videos and they had to lose their lives. But if something great happens in the days coming forward, then that day I might be able to grasp that I was one of the major people who was responsible for this change to happen.
In the weeks since Nepal's government was brought down, so-called Gen Z protests have erupted in other countries, including Morocco, Madagascar, and Peru. The outcome of these movements is uncertain, and their motivations are varied. But they are each grounded in the economics of inequality and a belief among younger generations that the system has, in some way, failed them.
Has something changed in society that makes people angrier about their condition? We've had the peasants and the royalty forever.
So there is a general anti-royalist and anti-elite sentiment that is spreading from country to country, a sense that the leaders of the country are not natural rulers. And there's also a sense that the economy should work for young people. And some of this is really just comparative, right? If you live in a place and you have a certain kind of life and you have no idea what anybody else's life is like, it's easy to just say this is how the world is. But if you can see across, right, if you can see to other countries, if you can see to other cities, that comparative sensibility makes it harder for a royal family or a set of hereditary elites to maintain legitimacy. And just the idea that the children of rich people should not have disproportionate opportunity, that is a surprising new idea.
For Subedi and others, it's an idea whose time has come. A look over the palace wall made them angry, but then also hopeful for a better future. Hopeful enough to take action, and now hopeful that their action will be worth the sacrifice.
Up next, capitalism at a crossroads. That's what several experts have addressed in various ways as we seek a new model to replace the one that got us into the great financial crisis. Here at Wall Street Week, we bring you stories of capitalism every week. But this story is not just of capitalism, but about capitalism. Where it came from, where it's headed, and why so many people are questioning its future and its foundations. One of them is about to take over as mayor of Wall Street's home city at the end of the year.
I am a democratic socialist.
And if you listen to President Trump, it's not enough that Mr. Mamdani embraces democratic socialism. He insists on calling him an outright communist.
And now let's see how a communist does in New York. We're going to see how that works out.
Our Bloomberg colleague, John Authers, has taken a look through several recent books about capitalism's challenges, written not by its opponents, but by its supporters. And he has some thoughts about why there's so much capitalist soul-searching these days. thoughts that he shared with us. What is capitalism? How do you define it?
Well, part of its strength, it's something that grew up naturally and has had the ability to morph and adapt in a way that none of its alternatives, socialism, communism, etc., have been able to do. I've been churning my way through this selection of enormous tomes, all of which have in common this belief that capitalism is in crisis. The point is that it adapts each time it has a crisis. There are more truly non-capitalist alternatives being considered at present than there have been, and arguably the latest model of capitalism really fell in 2008. We work for Bloomberg, we're part of the citadels of capitalism. Everybody, I think, has to agree that the model that was in force until 2008 really perished with the crisis. You would normally expect them to be more clarity about what was coming next this long after the crisis. And I think the reason people are writing so much about capitalism now, getting so worried, is that we're not seeing that new model, that new narrative taking shape with any clarity.
Before we look at the new model, let's talk about the old models. What are the models that capitalism has evolved through?
I'll give you the schema that Anatol Koletsky, who's sort of known these days for having set up the GAVCAL. His book, Capitalism 4.0, is about what is Capitalism 4.0 going to be. 1.0 was laissez-faire. It gave us the growth of the British Empire, the Industrial Revolution, the Gilded Age here in the States, and it finally perishes in after the Great Crash and the Great Depression. Capitalism 2.0 is basically Keynesianism, the New Deal, the Marshall Plan, the GI Bill. It gives you the great successes of the post-war economic miracles in Germany and Japan, and founders, obviously, in stagflation in the 1970s. Capitalism 3.0, we generally think of with regard to Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, the great pioneers of it, Paul Volcker, with the way he took over the Fed and changed monetary policy, the role of the dollar. Nobody thinks that capitalism of the Thatcher-Reagan kind is going to come back anytime soon. We are going to have some transition on the scale of those ones I've just mentioned, the ones that came after 29 and after the 70s. The question is exactly what the Capitalism 4.0 will be.
Although capitalism in markets and democracy in politics tend to occur together and have some things in common, they are not the same.
In each case, it was the markets that signaled to the politicians that this model had ceased to work. With the Great Crash, with the great inflation of the 70s, and with the crisis of 2008. Democracy and capitalism have a symbiotic relationship. There's a wonderful line from Winston Churchill that democracy is the worst way of running society that anybody has come up with, apart from all the others that have ever been tried. Both have it in common that they're not perfect, but that they are more or less impossible to improve upon. They have internal checks. You don't want to get thrown out by the voters. If you're a politician, you greed and fear counter each other, and the two systems check each other. It's largely now up to governments to work out what to do next.
Does capitalism work without growth?
Yes, that is a critical problem. This is Sven Beckert's book, professor of history at Harvard. He spent 10 years writing this magnum opus on the history of capitalism, and one of the points he makes, it's like a shark. It has to keep moving. You could argue that it's capitalism 1.0, Gilded Age. Donald Trump is terribly excited by President McKinley, who went for very high tariffs in the late 19th century when America was expanding the way it was by building railroads, connecting up the West and the East Coast and all the rest of it, was a way of protecting this infant economy as it got ready to take over its hegemonic position in the world. However, most of the people I've been talking to would suggest that there's something a little more alarming going on, which you might call capitalism 0.0, or pre-capitalism, which is mercantilism, the idea that came before. Capitalism grows out of Britain's victory in the Napoleonic Wars, the growth of the British Empire and the Industrial Revolution. Different countries had their own spheres of influence and then tried to build empires to give them a place to sell their stuff to.
One of the problems facing capitalism is the growing role of governments in intervening to minimize pain for markets and investors.
Well, my point, David, in the book is not that capitalism has failed, but that it's been ruined. And it's been ruined by government over time.
Author Rashir Sharma is head of Rockefeller Capital Management's international business. His book is What Went Wrong with Capitalism.
So then you began to expand the role of the state. The problem is that it is now expanded to such an extent, and it's not just about government spending, as I said. It's the culture of the bailouts. Who does it help? It's the regulations. Who does regulation really help? And what I say in the book is that all these things have systematically increased to undermine what capitalism is supposed to be. And the outcomes we're getting today is not what the founders had in mind. When the founders spoke about the architects of capitalism, they wanted more competition, churn to happen, that the incumbents are never entrenched, that they're always challenged by insurgents. Capitalism was supposed to create that freedom, let the insurgents come and challenge the incumbents. Instead, what we are seeing today is that the incumbents are getting more and more entrenched. The concentration of power, as you can see, the number of companies that dominate the S&P 500, how concentrated that is. And also the fact that you get this mismatch in risk, which is that you can capitalize the gains, but we are here to socialize the losses. I think it's this perversion of capitalism that we have seen today. And this is having real consequences.
That concentration has only increased in recent years. Much of the growth in America's equity markets today is driven by the Magnificent Seven.
Productivity growth around the world, and particularly like in America, has been falling off, right? At the end of the day, the key to long-term economic growth is productivity growth. So productivity growth is falling off. Why is it falling off? I argue it's because the dynamism that capitalism brought about getting new people to come, about taking out the dead wood, that dynamism is getting lost in this constant state support that we have for capitalism. And the other negative consequence is this concentration of power. And when you have so much regulation out there that helps the incumbents, they're big, they can afford to deal with those regulations, and they can even lobby in Washington to get the kind of regulations that they want. But small to mid-sized businesses, they find it increasingly difficult to survive, forget even thrive in this kind of environment. There's a deep unhappiness with the establishment, as most people are very unhappy with their own fortunes, right? Which is that in America today, for example, I think about 70% of Americans today say that they are unlikely to be better off than their parents. This is a violation of the American capitalist dream. The American capitalist dream from 40, 50 years ago was that most Americans thought they're going to be better off than their parents. You're supposed to be better off over time. Young people in America today, when you poll them, they tell you that they'd rather have socialism than they would have capitalism. For me, that is possibly the one most important statistic that inspired me to write this book. That why are so many young people in this country disillusioned with capitalism? And the answer for me is the fact that they are disillusioned with the current form of system, which they think is capitalism.
With all the challenges that capitalism faces today, perhaps the most ironic is that its biggest advantage, deep capital markets, may in the end itself turn out to be anti-capitalist.
One of the things that surprised me, I've spent the last 20 years of my life covering this, it's fascinating how many actual capitalists, people involved in finance, now regard the degree of liquidity in the markets, the degree of financialization as having been a problem. One way to express this is a guy called Amar Bide, who's currently at Columbia, very interesting thinker, argues that to make a market as deep as they currently are, to be able to trade things, you actually need to homogenize them, you need to plan them. You rely on MSCI and S&P to create indexes, and then you trade indexes. You get the rating agencies to tell you, yes, this is AAA, you can split it around however you like. That you end up, in order to make markets that liquid, so that you can trade them, they can become as big and liquid as they are, you have to make such sweeping decisions about how you define companies, how you allocate them, that you're basically taking the role of a communist planner. So There is an argument in which the liquefaction, the financialization of the economy basically did away with judgment, did away with the notion of trust in people's dealings with each other, and therefore led to a version of capitalism that frankly isn't any better than socialism or communism.
Coming up, what happens when the next generation isn't all that interested in inheriting that family-owned business we've spent our lives building up? The story of small business succession in the United States. This is a story about hand-me-downs. Not that sweater your cousin has grown out of, but a treasured local business that your parents spent a lifetime building up so you can take it over. A business like the family dry cleaners Gary Bachner has run 6 days a week for 35 years. It all began in 1961. When Gary's father, Seymour, opened the family's first dry cleaning shop on New York City's Upper East Side.
My father bought Joseph Cleaner's 1961 on York Avenue and 80th Street. He was obsessed with two things, Joseph Cleaner's and the dry cleaning business and the New York Football Giants. He lived the business, but as one of my friends said, it wasn't work for him. He loved the people, he loved the action, he loved trying to get the product to the people in a quality way, and he just had a great work ethic, never missed a day of work from 61 to 96.
Side by side, the father and son duo opened East Hills Cleaners in 2003, expanding the family's legacy.
We had to sign a new lease in 2001, and rent was going up, cost of doing business was going up, business was still good, and we decided to, okay, we'll sell, and then we decided to look for a store on Long Island, and we worked really hard to build this up. Okay, thank you.
After decades in the business, Gary is starting to look at what comes next, which for many mom and pops often means continuing the family business without the family.
Succession plan is something that I'm concerned with. I can't keep working, these hours. I try to take some weekends off and some time off. It's a small business, as the boss being here. My family says the brand in a small business is you.
Gary Bachner is far from an outlier. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, just over half of U.S. businesses are owned by people 55 and older. That's millions of small businesses nationwide that will soon be looking for someone new to take the reins.
The small family-owned businesses are a huge part of our economy. They're actually the backbone of our economy. There are about 5.5 million of them, and they employ a tremendous amount of the workforce in the U.S.
Christina Wing is founder of Wingspan Legacy and senior lecturer at the Harvard Business School, specializing in what comes next for America's family businesses. Is the nature of small family-owned businesses changing in the United States?
In years past, it was left to the children, and the children wanted to run it. Now the rising gen would rather the family business owners sell their business, and they'd rather inherit the cash. And that's going to cause a real issue in the economy, because it's going to lead to jobs going away, and it's going to lead to people in communities owning the business that aren't part of the community.
Despite the importance of family-owned businesses to the U.S. economy, and despite the imminent retirement of many who built and run them, there's still a striking lack of planning for what comes next. A recent U.S. bank survey shows that only half of the 1,000 small businesses interviewed has a succession plan in place. We talk a lot about succession when it's a big publicly traded company. Do small family-owned businesses think and talk about succession as well?
So the funny thing is, we actually talk about succession about other people, but inside the families, they don't talk about succession. We really need to start talking about succession a lot earlier, and it has nothing to do with the size of the business.
If I am an owner of a small business, and I'm getting on in years, and I want to figure out a way out, where do I turn? Who do I ask for advice?
There are advisors, unfortunately, who most owners of a small business ask. They ask a friend, and most friend has done it poorly. We have this problem everywhere in the world where succession and age get mingled. And so you start to feel, I'm old, I need a succession plan, oh, I better sell. But if they would talk to more professionals in the space, I think that they would see they have other options. And that's that spectrum of owner-operator to owner-investor. I think there's a lot of people that would love to hold the business because sometimes their children might not want to work in it, but their grandchildren might want to. And so if you can kind of play it out for a while, it gives you more flexibility.
Over the next 25 years, baby boomer and older households are expected to pass down about $100 trillion in wealth. And though we don't know exactly how much will come from family-owned businesses, those holdings make up roughly 18% of their net worth, pointing to an estimated $18 trillion in business value that could change hands by 2048. But unlike other assets, family businesses can be messy, which makes the next generation less interested in receiving what's being passed down.
The era of sort of 2015 to 2018, I felt a little more pressure from founders wanting to work with their children. I'm seeing less and less, I should say, challenges from the next generation wanting to remain with the business, and really the business owner, the founder, looking for a solution provider.
Jarrett Turner comes from a family business, a roofing company founded and still operated by his 73-year-old father. Like others, Turner didn't want to go into the business himself, but instead started a middle-market private equity firm 11 years ago to help people like his dad when the time came for them to step down.
A lot of these businesses, the value in part is the connection to the community. They know the owner. They've been going to the same shop for a long time. Does the value of the business go down when it does come time for the founder to leave?
If the founder were to leave and control a lot of local relationships, I think inherently the business value would go down.
Turner's Soundcore gives owners the option to sell while staying involved in running their business for an extended period, preserving, at least for a time, the best of a local enterprise. It provides capital to those who built the businesses and continuity for the communities they serve.
We're focused on developing theses in sectors which we deem to be highly fragmented, in big market TAMs where we can aggregate and buy a number of family founder, owner-operated businesses in the same sector. We can professionalize, we can implement technology, best practices, procurement programs, and take them to sort of the next level of professionalization, take market share, grow revenue, improve margins, and then typically sell within 4 to 5 years to a larger scale buyer.
Typically, when you buy a business, is it 100% of the business?
So I think when you're a private equity firm, or maybe you're a family buying someone else's business, one of the challenges is customer relationships with the business owner, and also the DNA of that business, the culture is often driven by 1 or 2 people. So for us as a philosophy, we look at sellers and we put together a seller retention matrix where we look at a lot of qualitative aspects of their personality and how long have they been with the business, the number of customers that they have, the number of suppliers that they have. But one of the best ways as a buyer to assure that you're going to have interest in that business owner to continue to sort of drive the business forward and not improve their golf score the next day is to have skin in the game.
Do you have much competition in private equity for small family-owned businesses?
I would say you'd have to look at our average multiple that we pay. If you type in private equity and average purchase price multiple into Google or another search engine, you'll typically see 12 to 20 plus times EBITDA. We've averaged in context at a 5.9 times multiple, and that's across 109 acquisitions. So in terms of our volume and the number of acquisitions that we've done and apply that to the multiple, we're probably one of the lowest of any private equity firm in the United States. I would use that as evidence that we don't have a lot of competition. The way that we're able to do that is we're buying very small businesses.
In a changing economy, dependable cash-generating businesses are gold mines, especially for private equity firms able to buy small and scale fast.
We at Soundcore, we focus on recession-resistant businesses.
What's your average length of time you hold them?
So we've owned businesses for, a spread of 3 to 7 years. Our average is 5 years.
So that strikes me as remarkably short in private equity generally right now. We hear a lot, read a lot about private equity generally, the big private equity, having trouble getting out of investments. Is yours a different approach to private equity?
I think it is. I mean, I think there are a few things that you can do wrong in private equity. You can overpay for businesses, you can over leverage them and put them into a bad capital structure, or you can pick your favorite child and put too much of your fund in a commingled fund into one deal that doesn't go right. It drags down the rest of the fund. I think by our strategy of not overpaying for businesses, but giving business owners a fair price, not chasing to win auction processes, there's a lot more opportunity, even in this market, to exit our businesses.
For many owners, firms like Turner's present a way out, even if taken in stages. But Wing warns that the rise of large consolidators brings its own consequences.
We're seeing immense consolidation in the space, which means a private equity firm might have a mandate to go buy 100 dry cleaners within the Southwest or the Southeast or wherever. And then the brand and the experience becomes that of the 100, not of the local. And so it's a change in the community.
Well, that may not be an entity the local community likes as much, but it may be a more efficient business, may it not?
I think that the roll up of a lot of different personality-based businesses, there are great reasons to do that in certain places, but I don't think overall that I would make a statement that a financial buyer is a better owner than others unequivocally. But there are cases where they are.
And that brings Wing to a challenge she sees again and again. Many longtime owners assume selling is their only way to retire.
Because they've been owner-operators. If we can get some of them to understand, they could become owner-investors themselves, meaning they could keep the business, have somebody else run it, pay that person, but still own it.
Legacy's everything, you know. This is how I grew up. Quality, responsibility, and personality. We have great relationships with our customers. We've known them now generations.
Oh, really?
We give them a good product, and we like serving the community.
For Bachner, like so many others, it's never just a business. It's the early mornings, the familiar faces, the generations of trust that turn a storefront into a cornerstone of a community. And as the next generation steps in or steps away, the values at the core of these small businesses remain the foundation for whatever comes next. That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.